Greetings and welcome to this week's Midweek Refuel, where we explore the spiritual classics of Christianity in order to prepare ourselves for today's spiritual warfare. My name is John Whitfield, and I am the senior pastor of Remnant Church in Fuquay-Varina, North Carolina, a gathering of Jesus followers seeking to unearth and benefit from the Christian mystic tradition. Why do I introduce this lesson in this mystic way? Because what we are going to read today, a section that is springboarding from a discussion about Alypius and his addictions from last week, is a unique approach to rationally viewing sin, not just as an infraction of the rules of the Creator or even as a disease that blinds and binds, but also as a simple source of distraction from achieving the higher and better things in life. Augustine wants more than to be forgiven. Augustine wants encounter and enlightenment. He wants encounter with God and enlightenment and wisdom. Listen to a section of the opening paragraph. Quote, "I had begun my fervent quest for wisdom, making it my purpose to discover it and abandon all the empty hopes, all the deceitful delusions that my vain desires awoke in me. I was now some 30 years old and still stuck in the same mud in my avid desire to enjoy things present, even though they tore me in so many directions. And all the time I said, wisdom, I'll discover it tomorrow. It will appear before my eyes and I will lay hold of it." Unquote. Augustine is frustrated with sin. Not with sin as a corrupter of our nature, but sin as a distraction from the cure. Squirrel, Sin as missing the mark rather than sin as murderous and abhorrent intent or behavior. This fine line is the reason why so many people today react so strongly when a Christian or a pastor tells them that they are not a good person or that they are indeed sinners. They feel like good people because they haven't killed someone or they haven't stolen anything significant. They hold a steady job and they always round up at the cash register. But the truth is that they have chosen sin over seeking wisdom and the kingdom first. Each of us has and will in some ways continue to do so until we are in our glorified bodies. Sin is watching the game when the kids are dying. Sin is playing video games when the marriage is collapsing. Sin is reading Stephen King in the bathroom while your boss wonders where you are. You aren't doing anything wrong. You just aren't doing anything right either. You are missing the mark. Think of it as playing solitaire while on the clock. Nothing wrong with solitaire, but I'm pretty sure you are sinning against your boss. So you see what is happening. Sin becomes detached from the object of desire or the symptom of sin and rightly seen as that human flaw or that human fracture that was self-inflicted when we first sinned and fell in the Garden of Eden. Augustine writes, quote, "I was in love with the blessed life, but feared it, even in its own home, and sought it, even as I fled from it." Unquote. I absolutely love that quote. I was in love with the blessed life, but I feared it. What a horrible and blessed time is the moment when sin is seen clearly for what it is instead of blaming the symptoms of sin any longer. Sin is not the sexual fling, but the thing within that cares more about the sexual fling than the thoughts, feelings, emotions, and long-term effects on self and culture of said fling. Sex itself isn't bad. Sex in the wrong place at the wrong time and with the wrong person is bad. The spiritual nature of sexual sin has been known for a very, very, very long time. The psychological nature of sexual sin has been discovered over the course of my lifetime, and the findings are not pretty. But oddly enough, Augustine doesn't mention any of these obvious shortcomings of poor sexual ethics while he's talking about sexual ethics. Rather, he is concerned with whether a sexual partner will hinder him from being able to pursue wisdom with his entire being. If you think it was just your kids who said all the other kids are doing it, then listen to these words from a 2,000-year-old book from a middle-aged man. Quote, "Many great men, worthy models for imitation, have combined matrimony with a dedicated pursuit of wisdom," unquote. Augustine himself tries to pull the old "everyone is doing it" excuse. Alypius is dragged away from ministry and from education by the circus and by the gladiatorial games. Augustine is dragged away by the short skirt. What are you dragged away by? Not every entertainment will drag you away, but I believe these readings are alarming and alerting enough to make us take pause and assess our own areas in life where we might be missing the mark. Do I have a prayer life? Do I read the Word of God on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? Do I seek God at all? Or do I turn on Spotify and Netflix and zone out until work resumes on Monday? Augustine says, quote, "I, however, fell far short of them in greatness of soul. Bound to my carnal disease by the bond of deadly pleasure, I dragged my chain around, fearing to be released from it, and rejecting Alypius's words of good advice as though my wound had been exacerbated by the hands of my rescuer. And moreover, the serpent was speaking through me to Alypius, using my tongue to weave his alluring snares and set them in Alypius's path, to trap the feet that had always been honorable and unfettered," unquote. He says that he was bound by his carnal disease. The sarx is dying. The spirit is now being birthed. The flesh is being crucified in order to make room for the life of the spirit. Sin, not something specific, not some specific thing, but sin itself has kept Augustine from being able to fully grasp the truth of the Scriptures. His flesh tells him that happiness is found in fulfilling fleshly desires, but the Spirit is beginning to warn him that these fleshly desires can and will lead to death if allowed to do so. They will lead to death, depression, and sorrow if they are allowed dominion and rule. In order to fully launch into the life of the Spirit, the flesh must share in the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. But Augustine clings to the chain of sin and to the old man, fearful of what life looks like without the carnal desires being fed. If fulfilling carnal desire is the only and highest form of pleasure, well, then you should absolutely gluttonize yourself. If, however, these carnal desires are skewed, misaligned through selfish ambition and the pride of life, and pay out in short-term pleasure but long-term pain, which slowly but surely thins the soul beyond recognition, even to yourself, then you should avoid them at all cost and discover what is their rightful place if they do indeed have a rightful place. If they do, well, then contain them. If they do not, then remove them from your life and seek the higher pleasures and the lasting treasures. I also find it funny that Augustine notices that we are all dragged away by different things. My mom would always tell me that people were bent in their own sinful ways or in their own sinful directions. Everybody partook of sin, but in different ways according to their nature. I had my peculiar set of sins and desires, while others also had problems with sins and desires which might look very different from mine, very alien from mine. I may not even understand them. Therefore, I should forgive and have patience with them. For while I might not understand their sin, I do understand my sin intimately. And while their struggle might be with something else, the struggle itself is identical. And we are brothers and sisters. We find our commonality in a negative. While I was yet a sinner, Christ died for me. Augustine just likes sex. Alypius is said to, quote, feel the need for sexual congress, not that he was in the least overcome by a lust for sexual pleasure, but for knowledge of hidden things, unquote. I remember when the DARE program came into schools, they showed us how to do drugs. They explained to us what being high was. They presented all the paraphernalia to us while we were still prepubescent, just to make sure it was firmly rooted in our minds for our rebellious teen years. That started me thinking, wow, something so good that they have to show it to us in grade school and show them putting it in the closet of magical mysteries by telling us to dare to say no? Please just choose to stay out of the magical mystery closet. Dare to stay out. I remember figuring out that my favorite authors and musicians all firmly rejected the message of dare and instead dared to suck up as many black market substances as they could get their hands on. I read Timothy Leary. I read The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley. I learned of set and setting. I read books like those written by Carlos Castaneda and fell in love with any research into entheogens. Many of my friends were dragged into drugs by a desire to check out and have some fun for a few hours. Me, I wanted to join the great psychonauts of the past and explore the inner landscapes and spiritual dimensions which exist at the antipodes of consciousness. If that sounds attractive to you, then that is what I thought as well, until it took Jesus himself to put this Humpty Dumpty together again. Sin is sin. Sinner is what you and I are short of the blood of Christ. Sins are the symptoms of the sin state. Augustine sums it up this way, quote, I was for the most part tortured severely by the habit of satisfying the insatiable concupiscence that had made me its captive, whereas Alypius was drawn towards captivity by his curiosity, unquote. Captivity is captivity. Doesn't matter if you are captive to a soap opera or if you are captive to casual sex or to drugs. The prison cell looks the same. We are told to say no to ourselves daily, but we are also meant to say yes daily as well. I've not found a way to quit sinning without filling the spot left by it when I abandon it. If I smoke after every meal, then I need to stagger my meals and find an oral fixation like a toothpick to help stave off the habit. I need to perhaps even eat in a different location with different people. If I don't fill my life with the life of the Spirit, then it will be filled with the death of the sarx. That is just the way it works. Jesus says, quote, when an impure spirit comes out of a person, it goes through arid places seeking rest and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to the house I left. When it arrives, it finds the house unoccupied, swept clean, and put in order, unquote. You must fill the space left by ephemeral and temporal desires with eternal and spiritual wealth, which will not rust and moths will not eat. Augustine is afraid to let go of the world because he has yet to encounter the pearl of great price. He doesn't yet realize the full ramifications that there is something beyond this physical world, and that it is more real than the world that presents itself to us. Let us read from Book 6, chapters 11 through 12. And again, if you don't have the book, you can find it for free. It is open source now. Starting at 6:11-18. I was, moreover, in a state of complete bemusement as I reviewed with agitation how much time had elapsed since, in my 19th year, I had begun my fervent quest for wisdom, making it my purpose to discover it and abandon all the empty hopes, all the deceitful delusions that my vain desires awoke in me. I was now some 30 years old and still stuck in the same mud in my avid desire to enjoy things present, even though they tore me in so many directions. And all the time I said, wisdom, I will discover it tomorrow. It will appear before my eyes, and I will lay hold of it. Faustus will come and will explain everything. What heroes the academics are. Is it true that nothing pertaining to the blessed life be apprehended as a certainty? No. Rather, let us seek more diligently and not despair. The apparent inconsistencies in the church's sacred books are not inconsistent after all. Another decent explanation can be given. I shall set my feet in the upward path on which my parents set me as a boy until the truth be found in all its transparency. But where shall I seek it? When shall I seek it? Ambrose has no time to spare, and I have no time to read. And the books themselves, where will I seek them? Where and when shall I buy them? From whom shall I get them? I will set aside time and allot certain hours to my soul's welfare. A great hope has dawned on me. The Catholic faith does not teach what I thought it taught and vainly accused it of teaching. Its scholars hold it impious to believe that God is confined within the figure of a human body. Well, I, then, hesitate to knock on the door where the rest will be laid open. My mornings are taken up with my students. What do I do with the rest of my time? Why do I not make that my business? But when will I pay my greeting to my powerful friends, whose backing I need? When will I prepare new merchandise for my students? What time will I find for my own refreshment and relaxation after giving my mind to all these concerns? Let them all go hang. Let us cast them away, vain and hollow as they are. Let us betake ourselves to the quest for truth and nothing else. Life is unhappy, death uncertain. It creeps up on us unexpectedly, and how can we escape it? Or where will we learn what we have neglected here? Will we not rather pay the penalty for our negligence? Suppose death itself cuts short and puts an end to all our senses and all our cares with them. This question too must be asked. But far be it that this should be so. It is not for nothing, not in vain, that the authority of the Christian faith should stand so high and be diffused throughout the whole world. Never would the divine power work so much or so great things for us if the life of the soul were extinguished in the death of the body. Why then do we hesitate to abandon our worldly hope and betake ourselves to the search for God and for the blessed life? But wait, worldly things too are pleasant and have no little charm of their own. It is no easy matter to cut short our striving for them, for it would be ridiculous to go back to them afterwards. Look, what a great thing it is to gain preferment. What more among worldly things do you need? You have enough powerful friends. Let us not waste our time, and we may be given a minor governorship at least. You must also marry a woman with a certain amount of money so as not to add to the burden of our expenses. That will be the limit of my desires. Many great men, worthy models for imitation, have combined matrimony with a dedicated pursuit of wisdom. While I said all this, and while the wind shifted to and fro and drove my heart this way and that, time was passing, and I was slow to turn back to the Lord and postpone from day to day my living in him, though I did not postpone the way I was daily dying in myself. I was in love with the blessed life, but feared it even in its own home, and sought it even as I fled from it. I thought I would be unhappy beyond endurance if I were deprived of a woman's embrace, and I did not contemplate the medicine of your mercy as a cure for my infirmity. For I had not known it. I thought that continence was a matter of my own strength, which I was not conscious of possessing. For I was so foolish that I did not know that, as it is written, no one can be continent unless you grant it to them. And you would have granted it had I knocked at the door of your ears with my inner groans and cast my healing upon you in sure faith. Alypius, it is true, kept warning me off marriage. His burden was that if I married, we could not live together in untroubled retirement, pursuing a love of wisdom as we had long desired. He himself was even then wholly chaste in this respect, indeed remarkably so, perhaps because he had had sexual experience early in his adolescence, but had not become limited in it, regarding it rather as a source of suffering and despising it, and thenceforth living a life of complete continence. For my part, I countered his argument with the examples of men who, though married, had cultivated wisdom and found favor with God and been faithful and loving to their friends. I, however, fell far short of them in greatness of soul. Bound to my carnal disease by the bond of diddly pleasure, I dragged my chain around, fearing to be released from it, and rejecting Alypius's words of good advice as though my wound had been exacerbated by the hands of my rescuer, and moreover, the serpent was speaking through me to Alypius, using my tongue to weave his alluring snares and set them in Alypius's path to trap the feet that had always been honorable and unfettered. Alypius then was amazed that I, of whom he thought so highly, was so tightly caught in the snare of sexual pleasure that whenever we debated the question, I could state that I could in no way live a life of continence. And seeing his amazement, could defend myself by saying that there was a big difference between his hasty and furtive experience, which by now he could hardly even remember, and for that reason had no trouble in despising, and the pleasures that with me had become a matter of habit. And if these pleasures were endowed with the honorable name of marriage, he ought not to be amazed that I could not reject that manner of living. He, too, began to feel the need for sexual congress. Not that he was in the least overcome by a lust for sexual pleasure, but for knowledge of a hidden thing. He said that he wanted to know what it was without which my life, which seemed to him so desirable, seemed to me not life, but a form of torture. His own mind being free from the shackles of sexual pleasure, it was unable to comprehend my servitude. And being thus unable, he drifted towards the desire to experience it for himself. For this, he advanced to the experience itself, and might perhaps have fallen into the same servitude that he had been unable to comprehend. Alypius wished to make an covenant with death, and he who loves peril will fall into it. Neither of us took any but the slightest thought of what honor was due to the union of a man and a woman in its proper function, the living of an ordered married life and the bringing up of children. I was, for the most part, tortured severely by the habit of satisfying the insatiable concupiscence that had made me its captive, whereas Alypius was drawn towards captivity by his curiosity. Such we were, until you, Most High God, who do not desert us, dust as we are, had mercy upon our unhappiness, and came to our aid in strange and hidden ways. Alypius wished to make a covenant with death, and he who loves peril will fall into it. Do not love peril. Do not fall into it. Do not make a covenant willingly with death. Do not sell your birthright for soup. If you have sinned to the point that you don't love yourself and you question if anyone loves you at all, then know this: no matter how low you fall, no matter how thin your soul gets stretched within you, the moment you lift your head back up and confess your miserable state to God and accept his son's sacrifice for your freedom is the same moment your soul is restored unto you and the image of God begins to heal within your own holy of holies. The temple can and the temple will be cleansed by the King of Kings. And when he cleans it, he also comes to dwell there. And when he dwells there, no desert demon or his 7 friends would ever dare step foot into the temple of the King. Christ is King. Hail to the King.